Welcome to Grid Talk. My name is Ruby, and today we're here to review the 2025 Sao Paulo Grand Prix, where Lando Norris has finished with one hand firmly on the Drivers' Championship. Joining me today, we have Owain Medford
Hello.
and Jawad Yaqub.
Hi everyone.
So yes, well done to Lando Norris, who quite frankly has dominated this weekend in Brazil, having won the sprint and the Grand Prix from pole position and finished 10 seconds ahead of Kimi Antonelli and Max Verstappen. Owain, 24 points now back to Oscar Piastri with three Grand Prix and a sprint to go. Has the championship been all but decided here in Brazil?
It's not all but decided, but I think it's now properly difficult. Just to just to run through the maths. It's now 24 points that Norris has over Piastri, which means I haven't looked into the count back or anything, but that means to overcome that he'd need to obviously outscore Lando by 25 points. Assuming that Lando finishes every race, and as does Piastri, we'd then be looking at, even if Piastri wins all three Grand Prix with Norris in second and also that last sprint, there's no way from that point of view that he can overcome the difference. So it's going to take, assuming that Norris is continuing his form, which, as we've seen, has been pretty ridiculous, or by contrast, Piastri's form has seemed to sort of falter. I don't know if they've maybe moved the car, the car setup has moved away from Oscar, or he's just feeling less confident within himself. I mean, he's had quite a few shakes of it, particularly even in this weekend with this crash and sprint, just from running on a slightly wet curb. So for that reason, I think it's really starting to get away from him, because, like I say, Norris doesn't need to, it's not cut and dried, obviously, but he doesn't need to manage this as much as necessarily you would need to. Just knowing that you can finish second every single time, and that's gonna see you through. Like I say, though, there's still that margin of, if he doesn't finish second in any of them, that's where the championship starts to open up.
Absolutely, and with Max Verstappen obviously on the form that he's been on in recent Grand Prix, or at least since the summer break, it does put that pressure on, in the sense of, you have to finish second at the very least to your teammate. But given Oscar Piastri's form, there's just been a couple of mistakes here and there that have cost him quite big. But fundamentally, I think Oscar Piastri has a level head on his shoulders. I think the odds are very much in Lando's favour. But I think depending on how McLaren show up for 2026, if it doesn't happen this year, there's still the potential there in Oscar to have that championship drive as and when the opportunity arrives. But Jawad, it was a race to the finish line between a resilient Max Verstappen and a buoyant Kimi Antonelli. We'll touch on Verstappen's run in a bit, but what a weekend from Antonelli. P2 in the sprint, P2 in the race. Just a good resurgence in form from the 19-year-old.
Yeah, it is, and probably I think his best weekend in F1 to date, with the P2 finish at the end and P2 in the sprint as well. Qualified on the front row for the first time in his young career as well. So I think with this, perhaps we needed a bit of patience around Kimi. I know there was a lot of chatter around the middle of the season where we saw that big form slump, which, didn't yield many points from him, but he's done really well. And, despite the gulf still between him and his teammate, George Russell, who's won a couple of races as well this season, I think, we just need to give Kimi some patience and let him ease into this career. Of course, he only had the single F2 season, which was kind of stymied by the fact that Prema weren't in form when their cars changed, and he didn't do F3 either. And, heading into next year, you were talking about 26, new rules, Mercedes potentially being, the best car. Better to have a season under your belt like this year of learning and hit the ground running next time round. So yeah, good result for Kimi. It's also huge for Mercedes as well in terms of the Constructors' Championship because we'll get to Ferrari later, but them scoring no points today. Red Bull again just back to being a one car team, and you've got both drivers for Mercedes scoring points at the right time of the season. So they're up in second and with a decent gap between them and Ferrari now in fourth. So, Antonelli's result is amazing for not only him, but also for the team at the right time this season.
Absolutely. Like, if you want an uptake in form, now's the time for it. And, you mentioned it, it takes Mercedes 32 points clear of their nearest rivals in the constructors now. And Ferrari having fallen back, I believe they're now behind Red Bull in the standings, which, as you say, we'll get to Ferrari later, which I think is the trajectory for a lot of drivers' careers at the very least. But, you know, Owain, let's get into it. Everyone's going to be talking about it, so we might as well. Turn one between Oscar Piastri, Kimi Antonelli, and Charles Leclerc. The stewards decided it warranted a 10-second penalty for Oscar Piastri. Was this the right decision? Where do you stand on this?
I'm going to be, I think, a little bit controversial when I say I think it was. I think that was a deserved penalty. I don't. I think that given that it was three wide, and Oscar was the furthest back of the cars, from what I remember. That he was going for a disappear, a wedge that was always going to disappear. Like Kimi Antonelli can't disappear. He's got a car on his outside. And I know it's not as cut and dried as it wasn't a super lunge from really far back. But I think Oscar maybe had a slightly better view. Maybe he was blocked by Antonelli from seeing where Leclerc was. But the fact is that I think that the angle and the trajectory with which he'd have to take to take that corner with it dropping away. It's not his first time at Interlagos, and he knows that the circuit drops away like that. You're always going to lose braking performance, particularly when you turn the wheel. It's quite unique as a corner in that there's quite a lot of camber on the outside. So if you're out there, you can brake super late like that. But if you're on the inside, you're just going to continually lose braking performance over and above what it would be on a flat section of track. And ultimately, he was kind of on a collision course with Kimi Antonelli, and I think he was kind of lucky not to take out, with his actions at least, two cars. I think Antonelli obviously lucked out really, and would have spun had he not hit Charles Leclerc and massacred his front suspension. But beyond that, I think it was, as much as we shouldn't penalise the outcome, I still think that it was a somewhat reckless move on a driver who couldn't get out of the way, and was also, you couldn't necessarily see him. All he could see was Leclerc on his outside, and I think he was trusting Oscar, was Antonelli, not to pull a move like that.
There's definitely something to be said, I think, for this whole conversation about penalising the incident rather than the outcome or vice versa. And I think arguably based on what conversations have been going on, the nail in the coffin for Oscar Piastri is the fact he locks up during that corner, because then it gives the stewards the justification to say, well, he's not in control, so therefore it's a reckless move. And it's a move I believe Oscar Piastri was always going to take, because this is his championship opportunity. His rival is visibly ahead of him, and he's ahead of him on points. He's had a couple of messy races. Jawad, is there ever a universe where this isn't a penalty to Oscar Piastri?
Oh, who knows, really? In my universe, I think it should have been a racing incident. And the point you make about him locking up and the stewards having the justification from that to say that he wasn't in control, thus giving him the penalty. Well, hearing him talk after the race, if he didn't lock up, what would he have done? It would have been even more reckless. He would have gone and potentially taken out two cars. So with that inside wall there, a disappearing gap, it's tricky. And yeah, it looks worse than it probably should have been. We heard Charles Leclerc as well say after the race that it was actually up to Kimi to have left a bit more space. Saw the Sky team on their Sky pad analyzing it as well. And, while the gaps were pretty even between the three drivers going into turn one, as they all converged, it looked like Leclerc had, more space on the outside versus Piastri and Antonelli on the inside. So, I still think it should have been a racing incident. Oscar was far enough up at the apex. So it was up to Kimi to leave perhaps a bit more room for him. But yeah, the whole precedent of penalizing the outcome versus the actual act itself is another contentious thing or contentious result we've seen from the stewards as well. I'm sure there will be critics out there who will say that, Oscar shouldn't have been in that position full stop. He should be further up, or, he's shooting like, relevant to a degree, but, also if we're judging it purely on an incident basis, if it was Lando in this situation or anyone else, I'm pretty sure would be saying the same thing. So, yeah, it's just one of those things where we've been very vocal on the show throughout the year about, some of the consistency in stewarding and, unfortunately Charles, for no fault of his own ended up out of the race, but also it was racing, if we're not going to go for moves like that, then what are we here to do at the end of the day? So, we were on one hand praising, Lando in Singapore for the move that he made on the opening lap, and we're criticizing Oscar for this. We criticized him for Austin as well, but that was perhaps a bit more on the blatant side. But yeah, so got to decide ourselves too, like what do we consider racing and what we don't consider racing. And to me, that should have been a racing incident.
Yeah, in fact, what you've just said at the end, I think is definitely something that we as Formula One fans need to take into account. Do we want to follow the regulations, or do we want to be promoting racing and stuff? Because we're so subjective over whether, whichever driver basically falls afoul of the incident, determines whether we want to see the regulations brought down with an iron fist, or whether, we want to go, no, let them race, please let them race. Like one of the most hyped overtakes of the season was Charles Leclerc passing someone off the circuit in, was that Zandvoort or was it Mexico? Or it was earlier in the season, but post summer break, as far as I can remember. But yeah, we'll just subjectively choose which guidelines we want to enforce, and then as a mass mob online, we will defend or aggressively go after whoever it was that, our favorite driver fell foul of. But yeah, like if you're watching this or you're listening to it, head over to our socials or the comment section below. Let us know what you thought of this incident, and also bear in mind exactly everything that me and Jawad have just said about, making the decision between whether you want to follow your heart or follow the rules. And then we'll both ignore what Owain said about it being Piastri's incident, because we're on the right side of history. And, if you can't see that I am being a little bit facetious with what I'm saying right now, that's on you. But Owain, in our preview, you marked Hamilton's 2021 charge as one of your highlights of Interlagos. This year, Max Verstappen treated it to a similarly special display of speed, coming from a pit lane start to within 4/10 of P2. Combined with a puncture, how on earth did Max Verstappen manage such a drive?
I think it's honestly the decisions that Red Bull made overnight. Obviously, an abysmal performance by Max Verstappen's standards in qualifying, and I think he was kind of at a loss for words, really. And I think Red Bull were too. They're giving them all these tools, and I think that the telling fact from qualifying was that he didn't know how to go faster in that car, and I don't know how much simulator time they must have spent, and they were helped a little bit, I would say, by the fact that obviously Milton Keynes is is a few hours, is 5 hours behind, 5 hours ahead of Sao Paulo. So curfew wise, they would have had time to run things through the simulator. I'm hazarding a guess that they would have done that, but full credit to Max to get in a car that's got from what we understand, a brand new setup, brand new power unit, the whole shebang. And managed to pull out such a performance, unprecedented, or almost unprecedented. If he'd maybe not had that puncture, who knows what would have happened if he'd maybe managed to use some of the stoppages we had and things like that, or a slightly slightly more deliberate sort of choice of strategy, and one not forced. They were one that they weren't necessarily forced into. I just think the fact that he was able to get in the car and really, I think the term champions drive is absolutely what we can label that as. We see it from the best of them. Talking about Prost and Mansell and Lewis Hamilton doing it at different places, and he's done exactly that. Similar to drivers he's pulled out in the past, but again, this was on a dry circuit. This wasn't with people necessarily falling off. We didn't actually have that many retirements in reality, but it didn't matter. He managed to make up what was it, 16 places or something like that, 15 places. And as much as he had a brand new power unit and a lot of the cars that were slower. Sorry, thank you. It's 16. He just pulled out a worldie of a performance, and like I say, on a car that they didn't know. They had. I would assume they would have hazarded a guess, but you never know how the circuit's going to change. And it could have been even worse, but it didn't matter because they got everything right that they could, and it's I wouldn't say it's done. Obviously, it's not done too much in terms of his championship chances, but what it has done is just show that for anyone who doubts him, that Max Verstappen is world class, and this is just another sort of piece of evidence to show that, as if you needed any more.
Yeah, absolutely. He is now, I think it is 49 points off the top of the standings, or it might be, let me just actually properly double check this. It is 49 points off the top of the standings. So yeah, it's a result that he needed given the context, but he said before the race, the championship fight from his perspective is over, but he's still within the points that can happen. And who knows, maybe Lando and Oscar are going to DNF the rest of the season, or come together in every single one and end up out of the points, and Max Verstappen wins everything from here. But who knows, it could be that 2007 story all over again. But absolutely a 5-star performance from Max Verstappen in Brazil, and a 5-star performance here from us at Grid Talk. At least that's what I think. If that's what you think as well, why not take 5 to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or a 5-star rating on Spotify, or whichever way round they actually are, because it's late and my brain isn't working. But, also head over to our socials at Grid Talk UK to find out more about Grid Talk. But, Jawad, I want to take a look a little bit further down the field now. Oliver Behrman did a stellar job today to finish P6. Every time the coverage cut to him, he was making a move, some of them very gutsy as well. But it brings Haas to within 2 points of Aston Martin, and with the 2 Racing Bulls also picking up points, it's an important result in such a tight midfield.
It's a very important result, and good on Ollie again for another solid race. 4 races in a row now. He's scored points as well as accumulating those penalty points too. Whether they play a part in the remainder of the season will we'll see what happens there. But he's really come into form in this, crucial part of the season, as I was saying, of his ex-F2 teammate Antonelli earlier, while Aston, whether they've just switched off and are waiting for 2026 now, it looks pretty apparent with that. They had another pretty horrible race, even though they did pick up some points, in the sprint, thanks to Fernando Alonso, but they rued starting on the hard tyre for Alonso in the Grand Prix, and then we had that hit on Lance Stroll by Yuki Tsunoda on the opening lap, I believe, or on the early stages of the race, which earned Tsunoda 2 10-second time penalties because they couldn't serve the first one properly. Anyway, so it's been a tricky run for Aston. They were this team who a couple of years ago they were on the podium pretty much every race, every second race, to, potentially being relegated to 8th or 9th in the constructors, depending on how well Sauber finished the season too. Racing Bulls as well, they've come off 3 races with no points scored, with a good result for both their drivers as well, whether the fact that the contract decisions are coming from Red Bull side for next year and who will be occupying not only the Red Bull next to Verstappen, but also the two racing bulls as well. Maybe that's lit the fire under both their drivers to perform. But yeah, this battle is so tight. I don't think Williams is within reach, even though they had another dismal day and scored no points for the second time running. But between Racing Bulls down to Sauber in ninth, there's only 20 points, and Brazil was always going to be one of those races. I thought it was like a wild card that anything could happen, and we could have two Alpines on the podium like last year, but that didn't happen this time. I'm sure we'll get similar sort of madness in Vegas and Qatar as well. So yeah, it's a good result, and Behrman's again scoring points at the right time for them, and a timely result for Racing Bulls as well.
Yeah, I think Owain might have jinxed Williams because his bold prediction, if I'm remembering correctly, was a double points finish for Williams. And the 2025 Williams curse is that only one driver can perform well at any weekend. So the fact that Owain's put such pressure on Carlos and Alex, they've clearly listened to Grid Talk and gone, oh, we have to deliver. Owain, you don't get points for bold predictions in our predictions league, but we have to deliver. Owain needs those points. But it's all your fault, Owain. But speaking of Owain, let's talk about Alpine, because they gained more points this weekend than they have since Belgium, thanks to Pierre Gasly's P8 and P10 in the Sprint and Grand Prix, respectively. Obviously, this time last year, as Jawad mentioned, Alpine had a double podium, albeit in very different circumstances. And fundamentally, it changes nothing in the constructors. But after Bortoletto's disastrous home Grand Prix, does it give Gasly at least a little bit more confidence because he's just widened the gap?
It's got to, I think. I don't know what they changed on the Alpine. It wasn't particularly good in sprint qualifying, but obviously with the three DNFs and then the 2 points or the two places, sorry, that you got to get that 1 point in the sprint. Obviously, that's a great start in a race that doesn't pay much pay many points numerically. And then obviously in the Grand Prix, he did a great job to qualify ninth. And given it was a sort of topsy turvy race, I think he maybe could have done a slightly bit better. I think he's slipped back technically on the road, just by the drivers that have retired in front of him. But either way, it doesn't matter. No one's going to look at that. They're just going to look at the fact that he's got another extra point. I mean, yeah, that does raise Alpine's points tally from 20 to 22, and it still leaves them 40 points off Kick Sauber. But apart from that, I think it's at least positive in that respect. I don't know if there are any more learnings that they can use to take that forward, but you always want to be scoring points, even if it's inconsequential. I think that help. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes when it comes to people's contracts and things like that. I know I bring it up quite a lot, but I think it's an important side of the sport that we sometimes forget. But yeah, obviously it doesn't matter, but it does. Is what I mean. You still want to be scoring points. It's good luck. And it always helps with, there might be some clause in there about investment or whatever that they've got, got to score whatever at whatever point of the season. And, that's sometimes the balance between, oh, sorry, not the balance, but the difference between succeeding as a Formula One team and continuing or failing completely, which Alpine looks perilously close to doing, what with everything that's going on there. So I think there's positives to take from it. Obviously, it's not going to set the world alight, and it's not going to be headline news necessarily, but I still think it's a positive.
Yeah, and obviously you mentioned contracts there. Franco Colapinto getting the contract announcement for 2026. He'll be staying with Alpine, unable to inspire him to that first points finish of the season with the French outfit. But, who knows? There's still three Grand Prix to go. Maybe Franco will finish above P10 in at least one of those. I wouldn't stake my, bold predictions on it like George Howson will every race, but you never know. I'm just calling out everybody's predictions today as though I have any legs to stand on being the bottom of our league predictions since the start of this season, but Hey, I feel confident. What can I say? But Jawad, lastly, let's talk about Ferrari because their performance this weekend has been somewhat abysmal. Off the pace with both drivers in qualifying until a mega lap granted from Leclerc in Q3. And Hamilton not enjoying a race around Interlagos is almost unheard of. But what happened this weekend and how are they then bouncing back in Las Vegas, if at all?
I have no idea if, I'm sure Ferrari would pay me millions if I had the solution to whatever is ailing them at the moment. They had a decent sprint race, is all I'll say. They scored some points there. And then, of course, Leclerc's Q3 lap was sensational. But as you know, you don't get points for qualifying. And if that was the case, then, Leclerc would have been world champion a long time ago with the amount of pole positions he's got. I don't mean to roast them this bad, but it just seems whenever we get to tracks where the setup of the Ferrari is compromised by ride height, that, it's like they're in a Formula 2 car or something. And this again was one of those weekends where apparently they had to have the car ride higher up. And, we've seen them disqualified in China early in the year for that sort of discrepancy and in previous years too. So it begs the question as to, why are they continuing with this design philosophy? Obviously, next year we'll have a completely new car, so hopefully whoever their head designer is will decide, actually, no, this is probably not the best way to go. So yeah, unfortunate for Leclerc in the race though, because he was that unfortunate victim at turn one with Piastri and Antonelli. So not much he could have done there. But Lewis Hamilton, we've talked about how he's had amazing races here in the past, championship defining races. I don't know what you could call this weekend for him, sadly. The honorary Brazilian. He even said something he got called out for earlier in the week about being the first to run a Brazilian flag on his helmet, which was incorrect. Even likes of Felipe Massa, Rubens Barrichello have all done it in the past, and Gabriel Bortoleto as well this weekend. So bit maybe the sad days at Ferrari are getting to Lewis, and making him forget these key details. But he had a messy start to the race, which ultimately ended in DNF as well. And it's a big hit in their constructors' championship fight for second too. Now they're behind both Mercedes and Red Bull by 36 points. Not that you want to see Ferrari fighting for second at the end of the day. This time last year they were the ones on McLaren's heels for the Constructors' Championship itself. And, it's again, we've gone another year without a result for them. It's disappointing, but all you can sit and do is say, well, we've got to wait till next year now and hope they don't mess it up.
The ever revolving mantra of Ferrari. Next year is our year, and then next year comes and it's still next year is our year. But yes, interesting to point out about him getting a load of misinformation. Maybe it's his AI sponsor that he's relying on information from, and it's just feeding him the wrong facts, as a lot of those systems tend to do. But yeah, just poor from Ferrari, a weekend to forget for everyone in that team, but also remember so that they can actually maybe learn something and not show up, to a race where both their drivers are spinning in the same corners every time because they've really not got the floor where it's supposed to be. But yeah, what a Brazilian Grand Prix, or should I say Sao Paulo Grand Prix, as it's been known, I think, for the last 5 years. And let's move on to our driver of the day for said Sao Paulo Grand Prix. And it's been emphatically agreed on in our internal driver of the day poll. We've given it to Max Verstappen. Owain, was there anyone else ever in contention for this?
I mean, I guess you could kind of make the argument that Lando Norris winning the race and winning it by a fairly comfortable margin, is quite impressive. But on the other hand, it's not sort of winning it from the pit lane with an untested setup, brand new engine. Obviously, that's a positive. That's going to make it more likely. But you've still got to come through the field, where you've got to overtake, as we found out, 16 people. That's more than 16 times that he could have come up against someone who could have locked up, run wide, taken him out, anything like that. And it didn't sort of matter. He shepherded his car sort of heroically to take that third place. So yeah, I think there's no real other option that you'd really want to entertain apart from Max Verstappen.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, the driver of the day is almost always going to be the person who actually wins the race. But, there's so much more that goes on during a Grand Prix, that should be spotlighted and should be celebrated. And absolutely, Max Verstappen's drive in Interlagos this year has been worthy of a driver of the day performance. But, Jawad, how about you? Are you a Max Verstappen driver of the day? Was there anyone else who you might consider as a honorary mention?
Fair point regarding Lando as well. And, he was, I think, just missed out on the fastest lap as well. So it would have been a perfect weekend for him. That could have earned honorary mention. Ollie Behrman again and Kimi Antonelli with good performances. But yeah, hard to overlook the effort from Max to go from the pit lane to the podium, untested setup, and just, making it look easy out there as the, four-time champion would. So, yeah, I'm going to stick with the Dutchman on this one.
Absolutely. Max Verstappen, driver of the day for the Sao Paulo 2025 Grand Prix. And that's also what the consensus was for the official F1 driver of the day as well. So I guess we're all in agreement, which is quite rare for Formula One. But Owain, is there anything you'd like to plug at this opportunity?
I'd like to plug secondhand my abysmal performance in the Grid Talk Predictions League. Like you alluded to earlier, I have absolutely ruined Williams' chances. It's not necessarily the commentator's curse, but I guess the predictor's curse. Hopefully, it will be better next year. But yeah, I just had a look, and I think I have scored a grand total of a single point. So worse than Pierre Gasly and Alpine. In the predictions league, and you can find that at Grid Talk UK on all the social media platforms with the app. It's weekly. You can see all of our hosts who have done so much better than me. I don't know why I went for a Lewis Hamilton sprint win, but I did, and it's absolutely ruined me. And you can find that you can bask in my inadequacy when it comes to predicting at Grid Talk UK on all the social media platforms with the app.
Yeah, I mean, I was the one of our hosts who didn't put Max Verstappen on the podium, and lo and behold, he's done it once again. So, maybe I also should, maybe sit back in my corner for a bit as well. But what can I say? Jawad, anything you want to plug now?
Yeah, keeping the Grid Talk flavor. The driver rating show that I do with Tom Downey after every Grand Prix is worth a listen to if you follow Grid Talk. So you can find that on all the podcast platforms that Grid Talk's on, except for YouTube. So it'll be interesting dissecting another sprint weekend to see who put in a 10 out of 10 performance, if there was any 10 out of 10 performances this weekend, and who sadly didn't make the cut as well. So yeah, check that out for fans of Grid Talk.
Absolutely do. An audio only exclusive product. Product. I don't know what I'm referring to it as here, but
It can still be a performance.
yeah, it is a performance. It's a performance from our good friends Tom Downey and Jawad Yaqub. Absolutely. If you want to hear more from me, I'm at Ruby Rose Price on Instagram and Threads, and at Rubes on Blue Sky. And yeah, let's just leave it at that. But Grid Talk is available on YouTube as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal, and Pocket Cast. Just search Formula One Grid Talk for our back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to the race results. Thank you to Jared Bradley and Holly Eagle for supporting us on Patreon. If you want to support the show further, why not sign up to our Patreon for exclusive content? We have a couple of tiers on there which get you different things, different rewards, and also, as I say, some exclusive content. We've got some podcasts on there. And I definitely need to pull my finger out and do another one of those exclusive Patreon only podcasts. But yes, make sure you subscribe to the first to know when each new episode is released. We'll be back soon with plenty more F1 content. Thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast, and goodbye.